So before I begin, I just want to take a couple deep breaths. Just want to call upon our guides, the divine, the creator, whatever is behind this masterpiece. Just let it come flow through me. Let us both be a channel and allow what we need to say, hear, see, happen for the greater good of ourselves, of everybody in the world. That's it.
It's a good way to start it off with intention. And on that note, welcome to the Conscious Creative Tribe podcast. This is episode 4, and this is my friend Mike Govoni. So welcome to the podcast, Mike, and let's kick this off with just go into your story, tell whatever you want to tell. Let's just dive straight into that, because we were talking a little bit before about it, and I really think your story is so valuable for people.
Well, thank you, Steve, and all the listeners for tuning in to this podcast and being present with your own time to listen to what Steve and I have come up with for this session. But yeah, Steve, we all have a story. That's what I like to say. We all have a story. And we've all been through different things in our lives. Some of us are more difficult than others. But it's really, life's classroom. A lot of us, all of us get challenged to some degree in our life. And that's been my kind of common theme in my life is I've had to overcome a lot of adversity. And like what I like to say is like Mount Everest hurdles that I've had to climb over and get to the other side. So for me, this conscious movement that's happening, or at least within myself, I can say, is about really awakening the heart and mind to opening and going deeper and exploring who I really am, how life is. In the natural way that things are unfolding without trying to get caught in the way I think they are, how they should be. Just keeping myself open, seeing the magic that's happening all around me. But in order for me to have gotten to that place, to see that, I've had to shift my own consciousness. Or I like to say I had to lean into my suffering in order for it to speak to me and teach me to see life in a new way, see with new lenses, see with new eyes. So I agree with Carl Jung when he says, we don't come to consciousness without pain. We need that friction. You know what I mean? And for me, I've gotten that friction in many different forms, but at the end, it was inescapable. The suffering was so deep that it was either take my own life or it was transcend this. So to back up from that, I had a rough childhood. That's the real truth of the matter. In the beginning, my life was difficult. From utero, when I was in the uterus, my mom discovered certain things about the dynamic of my family and my father, and I began to swim in a sea of cortisol. That's where I think I was disease prone to begin with, because at the end, the suffering came through. There was so much dis-ease, D-I-S--E-A-S-E, that it developed disease. So from the very get-go, I had the odds working against me, so to speak. And becoming, being birthed into this world through my mom, she had a lot of suffering. And my family unit was a lot of suffering, and I had to work through that. My release for a long time, I got into drugs and alcohol. That's part of my story. So I took that internal pain that I had, and I went outside myself to try to escape it with drugs and alcohol. And of course, like all of us do, I lost that struggle at some point where that became, too much to deal with, and I had to face the real pain that was inside.
Mm-hmm.
So coming to grips with my childhood, how things were, how my parents were, was difficult, but that's one of the hurdles I had to deal with. I got sober and clean and on my path to recovery at 21 years old, and life began to open up. Started to open up my mind and heart a little bit, and started running with a different crew and opening to different people. And I got sober in a 12-step fellowship, which was great and helpful. 5 years in recovery, I grabbed a backpack. I traveled. I jumped into Mexico with a one-way ticket. And no plans on going here, there. Just kind of my blog was actually going with the wind. That was the name of it. And I set that up, and I did. I went with the wind. It was the best. And I dropped into Mexico, Belize. Where'd I go? Guatemala, Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and finished up in Chile. But before I left, from holding all that dis-ease from the childhood, it started to manifest itself in the physical. So I got sick and diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, universalis ulcerative colitis. That's what the diagnosis was when I left the colonoscopy room that day. And I said, what the hell is friggin' universalis ulcerative colitis? I had no idea. He basically told me to take 6 of these anti-inflammatories, take some prednisone, let the inflammation calm down. Well, it did. I got in remission eventually. Traveled and then activated it through a parasite in Guatemala. I got amoebas, which wasn't a good time, believe me. So I finished my travel journey early, came back. I was sick as a dog. I couldn't get my health under me. My UC, ulcerative colitis had flared to the max. It was just a really rough time. So once again, there's the suffering again. There's the other, little scratch I'm getting, saying, something's out of balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sick. The body's in a state of disease. So I was working as a headhunter at this point in an office, calling people one after the other, cold calling, trying to recruit them. It's just totally uncomfortable with the whole process at the end. Didn't want to do it. Still in it because of the money, thinking I have to be there. And my body's, paying the price. Because the body doesn't forget. The body bears the burden, holds on to all the experiences we've been through. And it had taken its toll. So I'm seeing doctor after doctor after doctor. Finally, I get put on this drug after about 10 drugs later. I go in every week to a prominent hospital in Boston, and I get an IV intravenously of this concoction to calm down my immune system. I was on it for 12 months. Every 2 weeks getting my blood work drawn because making sure my liver could process it. After 12 months, I go in like any other day, and the doctor goes, whoa, your liver enzymes are through the roof. So I was like, he's like, you got to go see a hepatologist and get off this drug immediately. So I'm looking at this hepatologist in the face, and he's telling me, yeah, Mike, if you don't take care of this problem with your liver, you're going to need a liver transplant in 7 years. And I was like, whoa. So I just gone through the rigmarole with Western medicine, and at the end, nothing's working. They told me another drug was coming out in June. And my intuition was like, wait, that's not going to do it either. So that's the first time where I was like really on edge. Didn't know what to do. Had to make a decision. I decided to leave Western medicine. At that point, I developed what's called a multiple chemical sensitivity, or TILT, toxic-induced loss of tolerance. My body couldn't handle the environment and process chemicals. So I developed this chemical sensitivity, which they didn't know what they didn't know what it was. They didn't know what to do with me. But it was really scary, because what happened is my fight or flight was stuck on. I had a sensitive amygdala.
Back to the cortisol environment that's manifesting again.
Exactly. Fight or flight. And I've been in survival mode my whole life. And now I'm stuck in it. And the pain was so great. But I began to listen to myself for the first time. I began to go in because I had no other choice. I happened to link up with a friend of mine's uncle who was a terminal cancer survivor at that point. Still is. Got diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma at 31 years old. We celebrated his 50th birthday about 2 years ago. Still alive and well.
Wow.
Healed himself in a holistic fashion. He told me to read this book. I read this book. I fell in love with it. I called the author. I wanted to consult and her to help me with my health. She's like, "Oh, I'm so busy. I'm doing a paleo tour right now. Call this person. Call this doctor." It was a functional doctor out in Idaho. I had no idea who she was, but I was a complete open vessel to all possibilities because the suffering was so great.
Yeah, you had no other option.
No other option. In that moment of no other option, if they told me to shave my head and grow a ponytail like a Hare Krishna, I would have done it. And chant the names of God. No problem. So there's something beautiful about that too, because then it opens us up to the limitless dimension.
Yep. It's like that whole concept of when you want it, whatever it is, when you want it as bad as you want to breathe when you're drowning, that's when you get it.
Totally.
And you were at that point where it's like, whatever it takes, I'm going to do it because I know this is what I want by any means necessary.
It was, like I said to you earlier in our car ride, it was inescapable suffering. I was either jump off the Tobin Bridge, that's a bridge in Boston where I live, or transcend this suffering. So the wisdom aspect in me, the sage, which we all have, knew I needed to go in. I needed to calm my autonomic nervous system. So, conscious tribe, listening. What? This is how it starts, you know? The calling, the friction, something's happening. So I go in, and I go in, and I go in. So one good thing about the chemical sensitivity is I couldn't be around the cars. I couldn't even barely step out of my front door. The exhaust, people, if they're doing laundry, smelling that in the air, all that sort of stuff was tripping me into a major fight or flight. Major, like super intense, super painful. So I find myself in the woods, find myself retreating, find myself literally grabbing and holding on to trees, like yearning for their roots and their strength to support me, literally. And what happened is beyond words. Steve talks about it in, I think, the first, podcast he did. God is, you can't put him in a box, or not him necessarily, but you can't put, the divine or the creator in this box. It's just way too big for that. It's beyond conceptualization. And I had one of those experiences, a mystical experience. I had an awakening, deep, profound awakening. The veils of duality fell, and I got to experience everything as one. Like there was no sense of separateness.
And what was that experience and what facilitated it? being in nature.
What facilitated it, I believe, and it's something. It's not like this one event and it just happened. Although it happened over time. I was building this concentration. You know,
Yeah.
they talk about it a lot in Buddhist path, building that concentration, right, and transcending that birth death notion, and that's what happened, and I believe it to have happened, or what I can recall from it, because a lot of it is like I can't explain it because you can't put it in words.
It's beyond words.
It is.
Yep.
It's beyond thinking.
It's all experiential. You have to experience it to truly know.
Exactly. So when I say I or me, I guess we can just say that. But I guess I dissolved. There was no body. I was the bird migrating. I was the acorn that pushed into a 90-foot oak tree. I was everything. There was no fear, right? There was no craving. There was no desire. It was bliss. And if you guys, I'm sure whoever's listening to this, I'm sure to some degree you're interested in consciousness, or you've tapped into it, or you're learning about it. And you'll hear this from the teachings of, different yogis and spiritual, these experiences that can happen. Jack Hohenfield wrote a book, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry, right? So
such a good title.
Totally, because after that all happened, I came obviously back into this human body, mind system, and I was like, what just happened? And it was very difficult to integrate back into this. So that was my experience with sort of consciousness and shifting. And since then, it's been all about following my truest self, what's bringing me joy, and assisting others in their healing. So I founded a company, Breath by Breath Wellness, because the breath is how I had the awakening. It's that bridge between the conscious and the unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
So Breath by Breath Wellness was appropriate because I literally began to heal breath by breath. I contacted that doctor from that recommendation from that author. She helped me. I don't even know if I would be where I am without her help. I was taking natural supplements and polyphenols and glutathione intravenously, antioxidants, building my microbiome, right? I got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, as I said. So to share with you guys out there too, I did what's called a fecal microbiota transplant. At first, I hired a buddy, got him tested with a professional microbiome company. He donated his stool to me, and I would do what I do, made a slurry, and I, to get, graphic or whatever, to share with you guys this is real, sharing with you. And if you're suffering out there from IBD, there's help with that too, right? And this particular treatment worked for me. And I had a dysbiosis. I knew that because I got tested. And
what's a dysbiosis?
A dysbiosis it's a ratio of good bacteria and bad bacteria in your system. So my bad bacteria overweighed big time my good bacteria.
Okay.
So I did that. I got great results. My digestive system turned on like that.
Wow.
2 years later, I'm still doing, holistic practices. I'm detoxing, I'm cleansing. I switched my whole diet up, right? Started eating just all whole foods in their natural state, total anti-inflammatory diet, earthing, opening my heart to love, swimming in the ocean, healing my spiritual, emotional wounds, going deeper, healing the trauma. And sure enough, my body began to heal. I am not completely 100% healed from ulcerative colitis, but I'm about 90% better.
And that's amazing.
It's amazing. I've been medication free now for almost 4 years. I happened to hook up and do another fecal microbiota transplant with a board certified GI doctor that supported me in this, and I wiped out my old bacteria. I took an antibiotic, which I was nervous about because I had spent 2 years building that back up.
Yeah.
But I wiped it out, which was a good thing, and I went via colonoscope and did a full fecal matter transplant via colonoscope, and that was made a huge difference. That was like the turning point, really, along with supporting the other facets. So Breath by Breath Wellness, I'm a certified holistic health and wellness coach. I help people heal, but I treat the whole person in the sense where, there's the cell and the self. It's the biology and the biography. What happened to you and how you came to be this way. What happened to us is just as important as what's going on in our bodies. If you heard my story in depth, you would say, of course this guy has ulcerative colitis. He was holding all that trauma, right? But do you think any Western doctor ever asked me, Mike, what happened to you? Tell me your story. No one.
Not even in their paradigm of possibility.
Not even close. So I found doctors, healers, practitioners, breath workers, body workers, if I didn't say that, acupuncturists, all these people, meditation teachers, helped and supported me on this holistic journey back to health. And today, I am passionate about helping others transform. So I think that's kind of why Steve and I have been linking up, because he's passionate about supporting people at their endeavors, helping them create online presence, and just, doing his other activities like this podcast and writing and so forth. So that's kind of how we linked up and got here today. So yeah, man, the path of awakening has just been so beautiful, but it first started with having to shift my consciousness. And then I got opened up to the other possibilities.
Yep, that transformation process. And you're right, it happens with that friction. And that's like the whole concept of a diamond is formed through a coal undergoing such intense pressure over time to become a diamond. And like I've had very similar experiences that forced me into the path of awakening. Like, for example, when I was 19, I drank way too much one night, was taking shots upon shots of liquor, and I ended up in the hospital, almost killed myself. My blood alcohol content was like 0.4, which is like death. So I was borderline death, ended up in the hospital. And that was a moment where I decided to I have to figure this shit out. Like my main focus can't be wanting people to like me and partying. Like I have to decide why am I here? So I started asking those big questions, like why am I here? What's the purpose of all this? What is life? What is reality? How can I help people? How can I be of service? How can I make myself happier? All that. So I started asking those big questions. So that was one thing that first got me started on the path. And another, for me, another big piece of friction that caused my awakening was being in a corporate job that was just sucking my soul. So it wasn't an intense trauma, but it was that slow grind of wearing away my authenticity and wearing away who I am. And I'm like, I can't take this anymore. So I was forced to explore things because of that. So those are just two examples of my own life. So what are some examples of things that not only forced you towards awakening, but things that kind of laid the groundwork for who you are? Because you brought up trauma and things like that before. So tell some more of your stories that connect to this, that support your awakening and kind of created who you are, laid that groundwork.
Sure. So I think the big one was the life that my father was living, which really wasn't suitable for a child like myself, that environment to grow up in. So we discovered he lived a double life. And that was very, very painful. You know, he was gay, and none of us knew it. And finding out about that made my whole world shift, which was very, very painful. My father was also a minister, so I held him on a pedestal, holier than thou. And when I found out who or what he was about, and not to say that gay is bad, it's not. No, I don't care what your sexual preference is. But in the family dynamic, to find out my dad was living a double life and portraying him as someone who he wasn't, all of my framework of my beliefs about him and the world in general from him being my father kind of turned upside down. And I had to look at that and accept that. And in the meantime, when a lot of things were going on, there was a lot of projection from him onto me and a lot of trauma in the aspect as I was the bad kid and I was just like my mom.
Because when you're suppressing, you cast your shadow upon who's ever in your vicinity. So because he, like, this is just my opinion, like, because he's like living that double life and suppressing what his true nature is, he's casting that shadow on you, and that causes a lot of trauma for you as a small child.
Absolutely. And as a child, my psyche, our psyches are different. We can't differentiate and, make sense. We hold it as though we are the bad ones or something's wrong with
sponge
me.
Mode. All you're doing is absorbing.
Yeah. Or mom and dad are divorced. What did I do?
Mm-hmm.
You follow me?
Yeah.
So that was like the beginning, really difficult trauma, as well as from my mom having a lot of trauma. She couldn't take care of us children. So she lost custody. When I was 3 years old, my sister was 5. So I had no nurturing through my mom. No women, I didn't have a woman or a mother to hold me, right? Hence, 20 years down the road, I developed autoimmune and nervous system problems. It makes perfect sense. As we both know, a guy from Costa Rica called David Magic Hands, great guy.
Shout out to David Magic Hands.
What's up, David? He talks about us being social primates and that we need touch, we need nurturing, and none of that was available for me early on. So that's why I think I was very prone to disease. Some of the other causes here or things or friction was my mom's inability to be here, but also her alcoholism. My mom is a wonderful, beautiful woman, but her alcoholism is the worst I've ever seen. Very, very traumatic. So dealing with that was very, very painful as well. So I had to navigate these different situations in my life as they arose, and further and further down the path, it's really when I began to let go of alcohol and drugs is really when the healing started to happen. So if you're listening to this podcast and you have a problem with alcohol and drugs, great. If you think, getting help is something you need to do, great. If you need healing like I did, great. But we really can't begin to heal unless we put those things down and face the truth. The liberating experience of facing painful truth. That's how we become free. So that's really when the healing process happened for me. But really what I'm passionate about today is helping people change the relationship with themselves. Because so many of us are living unconsciously. We're holding our wounds and we're living and seeing through that lens without even knowing it, taking this as to be, oh, this is how I am. when this isn't how you are or we are. We're really pure beings, right? We're Buddha nature.
Yeah.
We're Christ conscious.
Yeah, or even pure beingness,
Pure
you know?
beingness. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's my passion to help guys and gals kind of touch that essence of themselves in such a way that transformation happens. But first, we have to be able to be willing to open to what is, to how the situations at hand are playing a part, or how we're relating to life, how that's creating more suffering or more liberation. So I never knew any of this. I just operated from my framework and my paradigm of what I believed in and all that sort of stuff until my cage was rattled so much that I got catapulted out of it into a different state of consciousness, which I think is happening collectively, although, shit's hitting the fan right now, politically and all that stuff, but we need the dark for the light.
Mm-hmm.
Steve was just talking about, the friction that he needed. No mud, no lotus, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say.
Yep.
We need the dark. We need the depths of the murky dirt of life in order to experience the blessings. Thich Nhat Hanh would also say that heaven is right here in the present moment. And it really is when you open your eyes to what's happening. And if you're scratching your head on the other end of this podcast right now, trying to think your way to that, you can't do it. You got to get in the stillness. You got to get in touch with the unchangeable, the unshakable of who you are as consciousness. And like any teacher will tell you, it takes practice. So for me, I had to create a practice for myself. So meditation is my main practice, but also, I've dabbled and practiced Ashtanga yoga, just walking meditation, being out in nature is so healing. So what I've done is I have flipped the script in life from being concerned about making all the money and having all the houses and doing all that stuff, the material thing, to flipping it to taking care of my spiritual body, my emotional body, my physical body, getting in touch with who I am and doing what I like to do that brings me joy, opening up and jumping off the cliff and let the universe carry me, right? Steve, you and I have been talking about, I left my corporate job. I was making 6 figures in my mid-20s. I left because of that illness. And to this day, I haven't had a full-time job, but I've made every mortgage payment. I haven't missed a meal yet. And I haven't missed an organic meal, matter of fact, right? So opening and trusting the process and not letting fear dictate the choices that I make. And when we do that, just like you said, you took the leap from your last job and something opened up for you that you couldn't even imagine. I took the leap too, and I've been carried ever since. And it's funny because the universe will let you know too when you're on the right path. If you're awake and conscious, as all of you know who are, the universe is speaking to us back and forth, letting us know, hey, Mike, you're on the right path. Stevie, you're on the right path. Hey, listener, you're on the right path. So Spirit speaks to me through animals in number sequences that come up just all the time, undeniable. So I'm aware, I'm listening, I'm looking, right?
Like, what are some specific, animals or number sequences that, helped you become aware, to know that, oh, that is a sign? Because some people, they get signs, but they're not aware, or they dismiss it. So, what are some, specific examples?
So, what a lot of people are experiencing right now, or from my experience, talking with others and so forth, it first happens typically with sometimes 1111,
Mm-hmm.
111. Like they don't know what's going on, but they keep seeing it, right? So, my sister right now is having her shift. My mom's having her shift. My buddy Rich is seeing numbers like out of the blue. And sometimes when it's brought to your attention, just like right now, you just may start seeing them. So pay attention. So it started kind of during the process of shedding that old sense of self through the suffering that I went through. To be totally honest with you, I have a pretty significant relationship to the red-tailed hawk. And it's a animal that obviously flies above, and I have some of the aspects, the vision. I can see below. I can see the whole kind of
like big picture.
Exactly, yeah. And that's a gift that you get when the hawk is your power animal or spiritual totem. So the hawk was showing up for me 4 or 5 times a day in that process of suffering. Now, when I say suffering, I mean such darkness that I didn't know if I was going to live.
Mm-hmm.
And in shamanic teachings, this is like the process of initiation. And like we talk about, Stevie, they're all different. They're all passed to the same truth. So the shamans are really related with the animal aspect and nature and the different worlds and so forth. And that's why I have an interest in that, because I have a relationship to that animal part.
Mm-hmm.
So that hawk would show up for me, the owl as well. But the hawk would really just give me these messages. And when I say it would show up, it would undeniably fly over my car at about 5 feet above me. I'll give you one specific incident. I had left my company and I told them that, listen, I need to take care of my health. I'm taking a leave of absence. Great. I said, I'll let you know. I left October 2014. I said, I'll let you know after New Year's whether or not I'm coming back. It was like January 3rd, January 4th. I knew I wasn't going back. I knew I wanted nothing to do with being stuck in a cubicle and being on a computer and trying to recruit people, whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, you know what? I'm going to call my boss right now and tell him. Was I fearful? Of course I was inside. I was just about to let go of this. I was about to sever this umbilical cord right here of me being attached to them.
Yeah, but that could have been severing the weight that's holding you down.
Exactly. So, in that, are we willing to do that and move through the fear? And I know you listeners out there can relate to that metaphorically in some aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So, I pulled over, and I called my boss. And as I'm calling, this humongous red-tailed hawk just went, flew right by my windshield in my car, and every hair stood on my body. I don't have many on my head if you've ever seen me, but I just knew, the universe was like, yeah, man, that was it. Good job. You did what you had to do, and I've made life-changing decisions based on this animal showing up in my life. So that's kind of the power there with the animal spirit.
Be aware of the signs.
Totally. They're all around. They're if you're listening, they're there for you too. But are you awake to see them? The other thing is number sequences would still daily come to me. Right now it's 999s. I can't recall exactly what that is. But I'm going through a big transition. The numbers are typically, I believe, and for you listeners, maybe have more experience in this numerology, but it's angelic. The angels like to communicate.
I've heard that too. Yeah.
So I'm into that. I believe in angels. So they speak to me in that aspect of these number sequences, letting me know I'm on the right path. My girlfriend, they speak to her. My sister, many of us. So that's kind of how the signs have worked. But it's when you see them and you're in touch, you're in the flow. I told Stevie, I saw 8 red-tailed hawks on the way to this Saratoga Springs from Boston, about 3.5 hour ride.
That's crazy.
I do look for them, right? And
Yeah.
they are flying over the highway frequently, but here's the other thing is I see them in the woods at times, just sitting on branches going 70, 80 miles an hour on the highway. Just look over, glance quick, boom, there one is. There's the message. They're all around us. So it's about opening, it's about expanding our consciousness, our awareness, getting in touch with the stillness within, letting the outside phenomena just let it be, navigating life in a way that leads to wisdom and compassion. That's my flow today. And doing things like this that are creative, which I need support in. I need to get my creative juices flowing, which you've had really great success. You just came out with this mindfulness journal and all this sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing about connecting with like-minded people and getting into spaces where you can do that. Like, because we just came into this studio, who Cole, the producer of this podcast and my first guest on here, this is his studio. And Mark, who was actually my last guest, Cole and Mark were here last night, and they just said that Mark wrote 5 songs in a row. So he was just in that creative flow state because he came into that space with that intention, and it just flowed. So it's all about putting yourself into those situations, consciously putting yourself into those situations, and then it just flows.
Totally.
And I also want to touch on the point that you made about acceptance and not resisting what is, because that's such a crucial point. Eckhart Tolle says something like, in every situation, you have 3 options. It's like accept it, change it, or remove yourself from it. And most people don't do either of those, like any of those 3. Most people just sit there and resist instead of changing it or removing themselves from it or accepting it. They just resist. And that's what creates so much pain instead of just doing one of those 3 options. All else is madness. Resistance to what is madness. And that creates so much. That's where the pain is created, by resisting what's going on. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? You have anything to add?
I can, yeah. I totally understand. It's not even the pain that's the problem. It's the wanting something different is where we get hooked.
Yeah.
But without being aware of that, we fall into the same conditioned patterns that keep us bound. We have so much ability to relate to what's happening in a different way that leads us to freedom, but we forget. This is where the mindfulness comes in, the self-awareness. So there's a quote by Shakespeare, there is no good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
I actually told someone that quote like 2 days ago.
That's it, man. It's like, things are what they are. And when we can rest in that, it doesn't mean we don't take the proper action to navigate it in a way.
Yeah, it doesn't mean be passive and like accept abuse.
Yeah. You actually have more interaction with it when you just let it be, because you're empowering yourself with the solution to just let this take its course, whatever it may be, instead of interjecting with it and fueling it. For example, in emotion. How many people out there, listeners, have anxiety at some point? How many of you guys actually lean into the anxiety and are aware enough to say, "Oh, this is anxiety. Let me be aware of you. Let me embrace you. Let me soothe you, right? Let me breathe to you." Or do we get hooked in the idea that, "Oh my God, I have anxiety. I want it to go away. This is not the right time for the anxiety. What's happening? Maybe I should go to this guy. Maybe see her. Maybe do this." It's like,
and that throws fuel on the fire, and then it overtakes you.
Exactly. So the art of being is so important in learning how to be. I have a blog post, shifting from doing to being, on my website, breathbybreathwellness.com. And, how I used to do. After I had that bout with drugs and alcohol, I jumped into the gym. I was like 190 pounds, just trying to still run.
Yeah.
In that conditioned, response of like wanting something and wanting someone to accept me and love me for someone different than who I am.
And building emotional armor.
Totally.
And like that became the addiction that you were fueling then.
Exactly.
I've done similar things with
yeah.
working out in the gym. Yeah.
Totally. So today it's about loving myself for who I am, opening up, practicing being patient, tolerant, accepting, non-judging. And yeah, I'm human. I fall back at times too. But like anything else, it's a practice. And if we don't have a practice, I mean, we're just lost.
Yeah. And I think the practice is actually the coming back. So the practice is when you catch yourself absorbed in anxiety, or when you're meditating, the practice is when you catch yourself lost in thought. It's like, whoa, I was just lost in thought. Let's bring it back to the moment. So once you bring yourself back to that awareness, that consciousness, that's the practice,
Absolutely. And there's the way out. Once you realize you're caught and you bring yourself back to the moment, most of the shit that's happening or we think is happening isn't really happening. The suffering it happens through the grabbing the present moment experience of difficulty or distress or good or bad, projecting it into the future, wanting it to change, wanting it to be different, or holding on to the good experiences. I mean, those are going to pass too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard the expression that pain is inevitable, suffering is optional.
Totally.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And like one example, and I also put this on Facebook a few days ago, all stress is perceived stress.
Absolutely. It's not even the stress that's going on, it's our relationship to it.
Yeah, our perception of
Absolutely. How we're seeing it, how we're relating to it. And there are so many tools that we can do. Just learning to connect with your breath, right?
That's the gateway.
It is. Andrew Weil from Weil Institute, I think that's what it's called. He started, he talks about that teaching someone to breathe is the most important piece that you can do towards healing, is just connecting with that breath, right? When we do that, the body automatically comes into parasympathetic, rest and digest. We can get out of that fight or flight. We can lower the cortisol. We can relax and just say, it's okay. This will pass. Because as you know, I mean, most of us are dealing with stress-related problems.
Yep.
And there's no lions and tigers out there anymore. There's mortgage payments and Comcast bills and credit card debt. Like, those are our lions today.
Mm-hmm. And that's not like a 10-second experience like encountering a lion. That's months or years. So that's being in a stressed, cortisol elevated state for months and years at a time, and that wrecks your health.
I am a total living example of that. And that's how I got where I got, because I was in that constant state of fight or flight all the time and really didn't know that I was. A big piece of my healing journey too was the time I was seeing a therapist, and she said, I was explaining to her what was going on, and she recommended neurofeedback. And I was like, yeah, I have no idea what that is. But once again, I was such an open vessel through the pain. I was like, yeah, I'll try it. I saw the neurofeedback practitioner, and she evaluated me, and she said,
what is neurofeedback?
So neurofeedback is more or less the brain, and I can't explain it. And I don't think a lot of the practitioners can really explain it or actually how it actually happens. They just know that
it happens.
Yeah, they put these electrodes on your brain, and you look at a screen, and you're following kind of an image, depending upon like a dot moving or a specific image moving through space. And what happens is your brain waves are going off or out through these electrodes into a template. And it's like this. She explained it to me. At least I'll share what I know. She's like, when it's like a ballerina, like say a ballerina is practicing, and she's looking at the wall, and her shadow is reflected on the wall, and she can actually make corrections of her posture due to the shadow, seeing it. That's what the brain is so amazing. It actually corrects itself. So what happens is I got an evaluation with her, and she said, "Yeah, I think you have an overactive amygdala, right?" And I was like, "What the hell is amygdala?" So the almond piece, in the middle of the brain, it's a primitive structure, fight or flight. When we were back in
fear response,
totally, the bushes were rattling. A saber-toothed tiger was there. We, got scared. We ran away. We saved our life. So, from years and years and years of stress, all that cortisol and activation from the amygdala made it very, very sensitive. Hence, I was reacting to smells with the multiple chemical sensitivity, and smells or olfactories goes directly to the amygdala, the sense of smell, which is why people sometimes, can smell something. It can bring them back to a traumatic event, or like the Vietnam vets, they smell a kerosene or something brings them back to the battlefield. So the neurofeedback, I of course was open to it. I began to do it, and immediately I began to relax. But what was beautiful was I was already deep into meditation at that time. So the conjunction of the neurofeedback and the meditation was just so powerful. And I got really good results at calming my autonomic nervous system, bringing me back into a state in which we all know that the body needs to be in rest and digest, parasympathetic, in order for the healing processes to happen within the body.
Yeah, and even for higher cognitive function and intuition, because when your amygdala is overactive, you don't have the logical faculties to be able to think clearly and to have your intuition come through.
You're taking your prefrontal cortex completely offline.
Yeah. And that's why I don't want to get too much into conspiracy theories, but that's why the news projects that kind of stuff at us to keep people in that amygdala hyperactive state, in a state of fear, because you're more easily controlled when you're in a state of fear, and then the higher faculties aren't activated, so you're not going to have the higher knowledge to put the big picture together and to be creative, be a creative being,
Totally. I think what Steve's trying to say is the crown chakra is not activated when the amygdala is going off.
Yeah,
no, I'm just playing.
Basically. And the third eye.
Oh, man.
And that third eye.
Totally. So I like to say meditation is from relaxation to liberation. And it's just been such an important tool in practice in my life.
Yeah, and
totally.
We're coming up on an hour, but what I want to finish up on is it's something actionable. So I want to ask you, what is your meditation practice? What does it look like on a daily basis?
So my meditation practice, I'll give you the practice, the whole practice. I wake up, I grab myself a glass of water, I squeeze some fresh lemon in it. I drink that. I go upstairs. I sit for 30 minutes. There are some days, if something happens, for example, like this morning, I had to get out the house early. I sit less, but typically try to get 30 minutes every day. And then from there, I'm bringing in that sense of presence in my day. I'm doing my best to remember to come back, whether it's eating mindfully or walking mindfully or being present in a conversation and looking someone right in the eye and just saying, listen, Mike, listen. Don't listen to reply, just listen to listen. Having that self-awareness, practicing listening. I belong to a Sangha. I practice more Buddhist meditation. I belong to a Sangha, so I have other availability to teachers and practitioners and all those different things to support my practice. I also work as a recovery coach in 3 major hospitals, and I teach mindfulness and recovery in Quincy, Massachusetts, to help the people in recovery begin to calm down, begin to relax. So it's you don't have to sit every day for 30 minutes, although that's a great practice. We can do it for 5 minutes a day. Whatever it may be, we have to intentionally bring our attention to the present moment. And that's how we build this energy of mindfulness.
So that's the essence of your practice, just sitting and being present. So is that basically what it is, like a mindfulness meditation?
That's the formal practice.
Yeah.
which is only a small percentage of it. The
Mhm.
informal practice, because let's be real, I'm not a monastic or a monk, right? I live in this day to day. I'm a lay person, so to speak.
Yeah. It's what you do in the time outside of it, you know?
Exactly. Where are you when you're in your day to day activities? Are you like lost in complete fairy tale lands all the time,
Yeah.
or are you intentionally bringing yourself back to the moment to create presence? So what neurons, fire together, wire together. So if you're strengthening those parts of your brain that are just, tripping off to like never land all the time and overactive, amygdala or, in fight or flight, that's not really supportive. We have to begin to relax. We have to integrate that prefrontal cortex. We have to calm the system, and we can do that as simply as eating mindfully, walking mindfully, being present, listening to a piece of music in our car and really being present. But it all starts with the intention.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Starts with the intention, and it's deepened by the practice. It's not like you meditate once and you're good. It's that daily practice and then applying it to daily life
Totally.
as well. It's that constant practice, that repetition, because that deepens the groove of it.
Absolutely.
It greases the groove. Because I know with myself, like, I've been meditating every day for 3 or 4 years. And when I started, it was all thoughts. All thoughts. I'm like, I must not be doing this right because it's not working. This meditation stuff isn't working. And then day by day, and it was super gradual. So from starting with all thoughts, and I had this realization like a year ago, like, wow, there's so much space between thoughts now. So now when I meditate, I'll dip into this silence, this pure nothingness. And thoughts will come up every here and there, but it's not flooded with thoughts. So I reside in that space of silence, that nothingness. A thought comes up, I'm like, that's interesting. Let that go. Or sometimes I'll get absorbed in it for a minute or two and like, okay, bring myself back. All right, presence. Oh, another thought. So it's that practice to go from just a head full of thoughts and this must not be working to residing or having your home in the present moment. Having your home in the present moment, sometimes things come up. It's a practice. It's repetition. It's gradual.
Absolutely.
Like with anything, like working out too.
Yes.
You know, you don't go to the gym, lift the barbell a couple times and you have muscles. No, you have to do it every day or multiple times a week for years in order to build that. It's like anything.
Exactly. And through mindfulness, we're actually building the muscle of presence.
Yep. Building the muscle of presence. I like that.
Totally. Building the muscle of presence. And for me, it's taking the teachings of this practice and learning the teachings, the practice, and then the integration. So that's the importance of it all, as a whole package to really know what path you're on and where it comes from and integrate the teachings from them, the practice, so it becomes alive in your day-to-day life.
Yep. And then you become conscious.
Totally.
That's what being conscious is. You're aware.
Aware.
You have that awareness. You're in the moment, and from there you're conscious and aware, and then you can make choices instead of being governed by these pattern loops or trauma loops. You give yourself the awareness to have a choice in every moment.
Absolutely. Freedom. There's the liberation aspect of it.
Yeah. That's a beautiful thing. And that's a good note to end on. So Mike, like, thanks for coming here. Like, this was an amazing conversation, and you helped bring me more into the present moment. Like, I got deeper and deeper into the moment throughout this conversation and more aware of my breath while doing it. So to wrap up, like, anything additional that you want to say, you can say, and where people can find you online and all that.
So, yeah, thank you for all the listeners and Stevie for bringing me on the podcast. It's been a fantastic conversation up until now. I work as a certified holistic health and wellness coach and practice mindful healing, integrating the mind-body connection and conscious living. And you can find me at breathbybreathwellness.com.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
I appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, Stevie.
Yep. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.